Greetings, dear subscribers and casual listeners of my channel. The Harry Potter universe is not just the tale of the boy who lived, it's an epic about courage, sacrifice, inner strength, and those who choose to do good even when the path seems impossible. Of course, everyone knows Harry's name and his heroic deeds are undeniable, but today we remember those whose shadows may have seemed smaller, but whose light of heroism shines just as brightly. Enjoy the video. Number 1. Hermione Granger. Intellect, courage, and sacrifice. Hermione Granger is the heart and mind of the Golden Trio. Without her brilliance and composure, many moments could have ended in tragedy. Her heroism lies in calculation, strategic thinking, and always staying one step ahead. But even more important, Hermione is the only one who sacrificed her family, if only temporarily. Erasing her parents' memories to protect them wasn't just a spell, it was an act of silent pain. She didn't fight for fame, she fought because it was right. And in that lies her true strength. Number 2. Remus Lupin, the hero from the shadows, a werewolf, an outcast, a teacher, a friend. Remus Lupin didn't choose his fate, but he chose a path worthy of respect. His life was a constant balance between who he was and who he aspired to be, and in every action he reached toward the light. While others fled, he stayed. He taught, he protected, he fought. He went into battle knowing he might not return, but did so for a world in which his son could grow up free. If that's not heroism, what is? Number 3. Neville Longbottom, the rising phoenix. When we first meet Neville, he seems like a lovable failure. But that image is just a mask. Beneath it lies a spirit forged in pain, in the loss of his parents, in fear he never hid, but faced every day. First he dared to stand up to his friends, for the sake of what was right. Then he became a warrior in Dumbledore's army, a rebel against the Carrow regime and Snape's reign. And in the final battle, it was his sword that shattered the last piece of Voldemort's immortality, not Harry, Neville, and with that, he earned his place among true heroes. Number 4. Severus Snape. Severus Snape was never easy to like. He sneered, he punished. He seemed to hate Harry from the start. But behind every cold glance and sharp word was a man burning with grief and loyalty. He had once loved Lily Evans, and when she died, he turned against the Dark Lord who had taken her. Always, he said, when asked if he still loved her. That word became his entire life. He became Dumbledore's spy. He fooled Voldemort. He carried the weight of both sides, never once asking for mercy or thanks. In the end, it killed him. When Voldemort believed Snape controlled the Elder Wand, he ordered Nagini to strike. Bleeding out on the floor of the shrieking shack, Snape looked at Harry and gave him the truth. Take it, he whispered, passing his memories, his secrets, his pain, his mission. Only after his death did Harry understand. Snape had protected him since the beginning. He had been Dumbledore's most trusted ally, and he had died a villain in the eyes of the world so that Harry could live. His bravery wasn't clean, but it was real. It was enough to make even a scarred boy say in the end, he was the bravest man I ever knew. Number 5. Dobby. Dobby was born into chains. He served the Malfoys, punished himself for disobedience, and knew nothing but fear, but even in that life he dreamed of freedom. When he met Harry, everything changed. Dobby defied his masters to warn him. He nearly killed himself trying to save him. And when he was finally freed by Harry's trick with the sock, he didn't disappear. He chose to help. Again and again, Dobby returned to fight for the boy who treated him like a person. His final act was his greatest. When Harry and his friends were imprisoned in Malfoy Manor, Dobby apparated into danger to save them. He faced Bellatrix Lestrange, one of the most dangerous witches alive. And when the knife struck, Dobby collapsed in Harry's arms. "Such a beautiful place to be with friends," he whispered. He died a free elf, a hero, not with a wand but with courage. His grave marked by Harry himself, reads, "Here lies Dobby, a free elf," and that says everything. Number 6, Minerva McGonagall. Minerva McGonagall stood like stone when others crumbled. Her voice was sharp, her rules strict, but her heart beat for her students. When Hogwarts fell under the control of Snape and the Carrows, she didn't hide. She protected the children with quiet defiance. And when Harry returned, she didn't hesitate. In the Great Hall, she raised her wand against Severus Snape, her former colleague, and attacked. "Coward!" she cried, fire in her eyes as he fled through a window of flame. In the hours that followed, McGonagall became the General of Hogwarts. She summoned the suits of armor, cast protective enchantments, and organized the defense with unwavering control. "I've always wanted to use that spell," she said with a rare smile as the stone soldiers marched. She led from the front, casting shield after shield as Death Eaters swarmed the grounds. Her courage wasn't in speeches, it was in the way she stood tall, surrounded by chaos, and made sure every student knew they were not alone. Number 7, Ron Weasley. Ron Weasley was always more than the boy by Harry's side. He was the one who sacrificed himself in the giant wizard chess match so his friends could move forward, the one who plunged into danger again and again, even when fear clawed at him. But his bravest moment came in the forest, standing before a Horcrux that knew exactly how to break him. The locket whispered lies about his insignificance, about Harry and Hermione, about being unwanted. But Ron raised the sword of Gryffindor and struck. "I'm sorry," he said, tears in his eyes, and then he destroyed it. That swing wasn't just about ending a piece of Voldemort's soul, it was about conquering his own, the jealousy, the doubt, the feeling of being second best. Ron didn't need to be the chosen one to be a hero. He needed to show up, stay loyal, and fight for those he loved. And he always did. In that moment by the frozen lake with the sword in his hand and Harry gasping beside him, Ron proved what bravery really looks like, messy, raw, and absolutely real. Number 8, Sirius Black. Sirius Black lost everything. His best friends were murdered. He was framed for a crime he didn't commit. And he spent 12 years in Azkaban surrounded by Dementors, reliving his worst memories. But even in that darkness, Sirius held on to one thing, his love for Harry. He escaped not for revenge, but to protect the only family he had left. "I would have died rather than betray my friends," he once said. And he meant it. When Harry was lured to the Department of Mysteries by a false vision, Sirius knew it was a trap. Everyone knew. But he didn't care. He came anyway, blasting through spells and fire, to stand between his godson and the Death Eaters. He duelled Bellatrix Lestrange in the heart of the Ministry. He laughed as he fought. He looked alive for the first time in years, and then, in a flash, she struck him down. His body disappeared through the veil. No farewell, no second chance. That moment broke Harry, but it also revealed the depth of Sirius's heroism. He wasn't perfect. He was reckless, angry, still scarred from years of injustice. But when it mattered, he chose courage over fear, family over safety. He died with his wand raised and his heart open. Sirius Black proved that even the most broken man can be brave, and even the wrongly condemned can become legends. Number 9, Albus Dumbledore. Albus Dumbledore always carried the weight of secrets. He smiled with twinkling eyes and offered sweets, but behind that charm stood a man who had made terrible choices and spent a lifetime trying to set them right. When he learned he was dying, slowly poisoned by the curse of the ring Horcrux, he didn't waste time on fear. He made a plan, a dark, painful, necessary plan. He asked Severus Snape to kill him so that Draco Malfoy would be spared a soul-crushing act, and so that Snape's loyalty would remain hidden from Voldemort. That night, on the astronomy tower, Dumbledore stood unarmed, face calm, wand lowered. He looked at Draco and said gently, "Draco, you are not a killer. And he was right. Even then, even surrounded by Death Eaters, he kept protecting students. When Snape arrived, Dumbledore spoke only 2 words. Severus. Please. Not to beg for life, but to remind him of their agreement. In a single flash of green light, the greatest wizard of the age fell, not from weakness, but from courage. Dumbledore died knowing it had to be done, that his death would protect the boy he loved like a son, that Harry needed the Elder Wand's allegiance broken, and that Snape needed Voldemort's trust. He chose sacrifice, he chose pain, and in doing so he gave Harry the chance to win. The man who once sought power above all else ended his life quietly in service of others. That is why Dumbledore's greatest act wasn't what spell he cast, but what burden he chose to carry. Number 10. Molly Weasley. Molly Weasley spent most of the story in an apron, not armor. She cooked, she worried, she sent knitted jumpers for Christmas. But behind the warmth was steel. She had 7 children. She watched a war come for each of them. And when the fight reached Hogwarts, she stood her ground. As the castle burned and chaos roared, her daughter Ginny nearly fell to the wand of Bellatrix Lestrange. Bellatrix was wild, cruel, deadly, one of Voldemort's most vicious followers. She laughed as she duelled, throwing killing curses like fireworks. And then came the voice that silenced everyone. "Not my daughter, you bitch!" It was Molly. She pushed Ginny aside and stepped forward alone. The fight that followed was short, but furious. Sparks lit the air. And when the dust cleared, Bellatrix was dead. The woman who destroyed Sirius, who tortured Neville's parents, gone. Molly didn't fight for power or revenge. She fought for her child, for every child. Her love was raw, protective, unstoppable. That moment wasn't just personal, it was legendary. A mother with no title, no prophecy, no chosen fate, defeated the darkest witch of her age. Her fury was magic. Her love was stronger than fear. Molly Weasley proved that heroism can live in the quietest hands, until those hands are needed to end a war. Number 11. Fleur Delacour. Fleur Delacour was dazzling, yes, but that's all most people saw. In the Triwizard Tournament, they noticed her beauty first and dismissed the rest. Even Ron stammered around her like a schoolboy, but Fleur was never just a pretty face. Beneath the silver hair and Vela charm stood a woman of steel. And when war came, her strength burned brighter than any spell. After Bill Weasley was mauled by Fenrir Greyback, the world expected Fleur to run. Even Molly Weasley doubted her. "You thought I would not wish to marry him because of his face?" Fleur said, furious, her voice shaking. "I am good-looking enough for both of us, I think." It wasn't a speech, it was a vow. She stayed by Bill's side, unflinching. She married him, war be damned, and made Shell Cottage into a sanctuary for those on the run. That little house by the sea became more than a home. It became a last refuge. Dobby died there. Harry, Ron, and Hermione found healing there. It was Fleur who gave them warmth and food, even as fear gripped the world. No wand battles, no spotlight, just quiet, relentless care under threat of death. She never backed away. She made resistance feel human again. Fleur fought in the Battle of Hogwarts too. She stood beside the Order, not as a guest from Beauxbatons, but as a soldier, a sister, a wife, a protector. She chose the battlefield over safety and proved once and for all that courage isn't always loud. Sometimes it's dressed in white silk, speaking softly, standing firm while the world collapses. Number 12. Aberforth Dumbledore. Aberforth Dumbledore never wanted the spotlight. He ran the Hog's Head pub, muttered to his goats and scowled at anyone who asked too many questions. Most saw him as a grumpy old man, nothing like his famous brother. But when the world fell apart and Harry needed help, it was Aberforth who opened the door. Behind the portrait of his sister Ariana, he revealed a secret passage, a lifeline between Hogwarts and the outside world. That tunnel became the heartbeat of the resistance. It allowed food, messages, and people to move in and out of the castle while the Carrows ruled through fear. "I'm not my brother," Aberforth growled, but in truth he did what Albus never could. He kept students alive. He protected Neville, Luna, and the rest of Dumbledore's army when there was nowhere else to turn. His pub became the last safe place in a world where safety had vanished. There was pain in him, deep and old. The death of Ariana haunted every word he spoke. He blamed Albus. He blamed himself. But when the time came to choose between bitterness and bravery, he stood on the right side. He sent help. He fought in the Battle of Hogwarts. "I'm not interested in what happened between you and your brother," Harry told him. "I don't care that you kept goats." What mattered was what Aberforth chose to do now. He didn't need fame to be a hero. He didn't need forgiveness. He just needed to act. And he did. He faced his past and helped build the future, quietly, fiercely, without ever asking for thanks. Sometimes the bravest thing a man can do is keep standing when he's already lost everything. Aberforth Dumbledore did just that. Number 13, Kreacher. Kreacher was once a shadow in the Black household, bitter, mumbled, and full of hate. He loathed mudbloods, despised Sirius, and spat every word at Harry like it carried poison. He clung to the past, to the memory of Walburga Black, and the twisted pride of a family that fed him nothing but cruelty. When Sirius forced him to serve, Kreacher obeyed, but with venom. His betrayal at the Ministry of Magic led to Sirius's death. For a long time, Harry could barely look at him without anger. But everything changed when Harry did something no one else had ever done. He treated Kreacher with kindness. He gave him the fake Horcrux, explained how Regulus had died a hero, and thanked him. It broke something open. The old elf, used to orders and insults, finally heard words that gave him purpose. "Master Regulus was a good man," Kreacher whispered, his voice shaking not with resentment, but with memory. And from that moment on, his loyalty to Harry was real. He helped them hunt for the locket, remembering the exact day Regulus gave his final command. He told the story in full, eyes distant with pain and reverence. Later, in the Battle of Hogwarts, Kreacher returned, not as a servant, but as a warrior. With a rag tied around his waist and a kitchen knife in hand, he led the house elves of Hogwarts into battle. "Fight! Fight for my master, defender of house elves! Fight the Dark Lord! In the name of brave Regulus, fight!" His voice, once hateful, now burned with fire. Kreacher's journey was never about magic or power. It was about dignity. He proved that loyalty could be earned, not demanded. That even in a twisted world of bloodlines and broken hearts, someone who was once full of hate could find something bigger than himself. He was still small, still hunched, but in that final hour, Kreacher stood tall. Number 14, Regulus Arcturus Black. Regulus Arcturus Black was never meant to be a hero. He was the perfect son of a pure-blood family, proud, obedient, and loyal to the Dark Lord. But when he joined the Death Eaters, he found something he didn't expect: truth. He discovered Voldemort's secret, the creation of Horcruxes. The boy who once followed evil made a silent turn toward redemption. No applause, no speeches, just a quiet decision that would change everything. He tricked Voldemort. Regulus used his own house elf, Kreacher, to reach the cave where a Horcrux was hidden in a basin of poison. Voldemort thought the enchantments were unbreakable, but Regulus was smart and Kreacher was loyal. Regulus drank the poison himself, knowing it would kill him. He gave Kreacher the order to return home and destroy the locket. "Do as I say," he whispered, and the elf obeyed. Regulus died alone, swallowed by the dark water. A boy, not even 18, who made a man's sacrifice. The note he left in the fake Horcrux said everything. To the Dark Lord, I know I will be dead long before you read this, but I want you to know it was I who discovered your secret. I face death in the hope that when you meet your match, you will be mortal once more. These were not words of vengeance, but of purpose. Regulus didn't want glory. He wanted to undo what he once helped create. Years later, Harry, Ron, and Hermione held that same locket in their hands. It was Regulus's sacrifice that led them to it. Without him, Voldemort might never have been defeated. Kreacher, once bitter and broken, changed too. He called Regulus the brave master and followed Harry not because of kindness, but because Harry showed respect to the boy who died in silence. The world never knew his name, but the war ended because one boy looked at evil and said no. Number 15, Ginny Weasley. Ginny Weasley's story began not as a celebrated warrior, but as a quiet girl with bright red hair and a heart too big for her own safety. In her first year at Hogwarts, she was only 11, yet she was drawn into the darkest of nightmares when Tom Riddle's diary took hold of her mind. The whispers of the future Lord Voldemort crept into her soul, manipulating her every move, feeding off her innocence, and forcing her to commit acts she could not even remember. Ginny was not simply a victim. She survived possession, isolation, and guilt and emerged stronger. Many remember Harry Potter slaying the basilisk, but too few remember the girl who bore the scars of that year long after the snakes' fangs were gone. Surviving such trauma at a young age did not break her. It awakened the fire within her. By her 4th year, Ginny was no longer the shy little sister of Ron Weasley. She had found her voice, her strength, and her purpose. When Hermione Granger helped form Dumbledore's army, Ginny stepped forward, not out of curiosity or loyalty, but because she knew evil did not rest. "You're a really good teacher, Harry," she once said, her tone calm and focused. "I've never been able to stun anything before." She trained fiercely, mastering the Bat Bogey Hex that would later become legendary among fellow students. Ginny wasn't just practicing spells, she was preparing for war, understanding deeply that Voldemort would come again. Her wand was never simply a tool, it was a promise she made to herself, never to be helpless again. In the Department of Mysteries, Ginny stood shoulder to shoulder with Harry, Ron, Hermione, Neville, and Luna. This was not a field trip. It was a battle where death could strike any second. Ginny's ankle was shattered by a curse, but she fought on, refusing to surrender even as pain blurred her vision. Her presence there was not obligatory. She chose to go knowing the risks, knowing her own brother had begged her not to. Courage is not absence of fear, it's moving forward despite it. That night in the ministry, Ginny proved that her heart had no room for hesitation. She did not wait for someone to save her, she acted. Her bravery did not fade with time, it deepened. In her 6th year, as Voldemort's grip on the wizarding world grew tighter, Ginny became a beacon of defiance. When the Death Eaters infiltrated Hogwarts, many students fell silent in fear. But Ginny, along with Neville Longbottom and Luna Lovegood, rekindled the flames of Dumbledore's army. Together they waged a quiet rebellion within the walls of the castle, sabotaging Death Eater control, smuggling forbidden information, and protecting younger students from brutality. "People are dying," she once reminded the others with cold fire in her voice, "and we're going to fight back." She was no longer just reacting to darkness. She was pushing against it, unyielding. The Carrows, Alecto and Amicus brought cruelty into classrooms, punishing anyone who dared to resist. Ginny stood in their way, refusing to bow, even when the price was pain. Students were tortured for stepping out of line, and Ginny bore lashes of cruelty without breaking. She became the unspoken leader of those too young to flee, but too brave to submit. The Room of Requirement became her battlefield headquarters, and every whispered meeting, every smuggled loaf of bread, was another strike against Voldemort's regime. It wasn't glamorous, it was exhausting, frightening, and thankless. Yet Ginny never relented. While Harry hunted Horcruxes, Ginny remained in Hogwarts holding the fort. The boy who lived was absent, and many would have expected the school to fall into despair. But Ginny Weasley would not let that happen. She carried the weight of hope on her shoulders, reminding everyone that the war was not over. She inspired Neville, steadied Luna, and refused to let anyone forget who they were fighting for. She painted messages on walls, resisted interrogations, and endured nights in the Forbidden Forest as punishment. But her spirit was unbroken. She had learned long ago in the Chamber of Secrets what it meant to face the abyss and survive. Her love for Harry never made her weak. It made her fiercer. When she kissed him before his departure to find Horcruxes, it was not a farewell, it was a battle cry. She understood that love was not about safety, it was about sacrifice, and Ginny was ready to give everything. This was not a schoolgirl's infatuation, it was the love of a warrior, forged in fire and sharpened in war. When she stood at the Battle of Hogwarts, Ginny did not hide in the shadows or wait behind older, more experienced fighters. She picked up her wand, squared her shoulders, and took her place among the defenders of the school. During the final battle, when chaos reigned and death rained from the skies, Ginny was there, casting spells, shielding allies, mourning the fallen. She was seen dueling fiercely alongside Hermione and Luna against Bellatrix Lestrange, a witch whose cruelty was legendary. Though Molly Weasley ultimately struck the final blow against Bellatrix, Ginny's defiance in the face of such a dangerous opponent was another testament to her fearlessness. She did not flinch, she did not fall, she fought for the soul of Hogwarts. The death of Fred shattered the Weasley family. Ginny's grief was a silent scream, a pain too deep for words, but even in mourning she stood tall, her face streaked with tears and ash, her hand gripping her wand with the same steady fire. Grief did not unmake her, it reforged her. She understood what was at stake, not just survival but the future. Her strength was not loud, not ostentatious. It was in the quiet moments, in the way she held her mother's hand, in the way she comforted George, in the way she stayed close to Harry without needing to speak. Number 16, Alastor Moody. Alastor Moody lived his life under the weight of vigilance, not as a burden, but as a shield between the wizarding world and the darkness that never truly died. His name, whispered with a mixture of respect and trepidation, echoed in the halls of the Ministry of Magic long before Lord Voldemort's first rise. A scarred, grizzled veteran of countless battles, Moody's reputation wasn't built on charisma or fame, but on something far more enduring, an unwavering sense of duty. He hunted dark wizards while others hesitated, faced horrors that would break the minds of lesser men, and did it all with one mantra seared into his soul: constant vigilance. He was no stranger to pain. Years of conflict had taken their toll. Half his face had been ravaged, his magical eye whirled restlessly in its socket, and his gait was stiff with old wounds. But none of that diminished the force of his presence. Even within the walls of the Order of the Phoenix, where bravery was a requirement rather than a trait, Moody stood apart. He was not guided by dreams of glory, but by a profound understanding of what was at stake. He had seen too much to believe in safety, and that is precisely why others depended on him. Dumbledore trusted him with secrets. Kingsley Shacklebolt relied on his judgment, and even Sirius Black, ever the rebel, acknowledged his experience in the war effort. His greatest tragedy was also the cruelest twist in his story, that for most of Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, the readers, along with Harry and his friends, never actually saw the real Moody. Instead, they encountered a distorted version, Barty Crouch Jr. masquerading as the veteran Auror through cunning use of Polyjuice Potion. Yet the strength of Moody's persona was so impenetrable, so commanding, that even impersonated, he taught with resolve, strategy, and a strange sort of care. "You need to know what the curses do," the impostor said to Harry's class, explaining the unforgivable curses. Though those lessons came from a villain, they were delivered with Moody's authority, reinforcing how powerful his reputation had become. Even evil bent itself around his identity. When the real Alastor Moody was finally freed from that dark imprisonment, he returned not with bitterness or self-pity, but with his old armor of suspicion and grit. He didn't dwell on being used. He focused on the work ahead. He joined the revived Order of the Phoenix without hesitation, patrolling the halls of number 12, Grimmauld Place, and giving stern advice to anyone who dared act carelessly. He trusted few, smiled rarely, and never relaxed. While others laughed around the kitchen table, Moody kept an eye on the door. He wasn't trying to enjoy life. He was trying to protect it. The younger generation never quite knew what to make of him. Nymphadora Tonks admired him, even adopting some of his combat techniques. Yet even she found his intensity unnerving. Fred and George Weasley joked about his paranoia, calling his magical eye creepy. But they missed the point. That eye had seen friends die, betrayals unfold, traps spring from thin air. Moody wasn't simply preparing for war. He lived in the aftermath of too many. "You can never be too careful, Potter," he once growled. It wasn't just a catchphrase, it was a truth he had earned with blood. When Dumbledore's army formed in secret at Hogwarts, it was the spirit of Moody that shaped their tactics. Harry led them, but the shadows of Moody's lessons hovered in every strategic maneuver. Defensive spells, quick reactions, vigilance against the unexpected, all traits Moody had drilled into those who would listen. Though not their teacher in name, his presence was felt in their readiness. And as the Second Wizarding War ignited, the value of that readiness would be measured in lives saved. In the final year, before Voldemort's return to full power, Moody took charge of several critical missions for the Order. He organized the security details for high-risk situations, often volunteering to lead them himself. He was there when Harry was escorted from Privet Drive to Grimmauld Place. He helped monitor the Ministry, even as it slowly fell under the shadow of corruption. He never stopped working, and he never asked for recognition. When others hesitated to speak against the Ministry's silence on Voldemort, Moody made his position clear. Silence was complicity. His final mission was as noble as it was perilous. Operation Seven Potters. It was a desperate plan to relocate Harry from Privet Drive to safety, as Voldemort had learned of the protective enchantments ending on his 17th birthday. The strategy involved 7 identical Harrys, each escorted by an experienced member of the Order. Moody paired himself with Mundungus Fletcher, a known coward, but someone with magical value in this scheme. It was an uncharacteristic risk for Moody, perhaps his one mistake. Or perhaps he knew the odds and accepted them anyway. The skies that night were filled with chaos. Death Eaters ambushed the group mid-flight. Voldemort himself soared through the storm, chasing the real Harry, his snake-like face twisted with fury. Moody, meanwhile, vanished from the formation. Later, they discovered the truth. Mundungus had panicked and disapparated, leaving Moody exposed. He didn't run, he fought, and he fell. No body was recovered. Only his magical eye was later found nailed to Umbridge's office door. A final act of desecration by the corrupted Ministry. Yet his death was not in vain. It bought time, it diverted enemies, it honored the one cause Moody had served his entire life, protecting the future. "Mad Eye's dead," Bill Weasley said somberly, delivering the news. "We saw him fall." But in that fall he had once again placed himself between the innocent and the oncoming storm. He had died exactly as he had lived, alert, unyielding, and in service of others. Number 17. Luna Lovegood. Luna Lovegood was the kind of person who seemed like she belonged in a different world, one filled with dreams, whispers of invisible creatures, and truths only the brave dared to believe. Her silver-blonde hair, always a little wild, and her distant gaze often earned her the nickname Loony from students at Hogwarts. But behind the whimsical exterior was a mind untouched by conformity and a soul defined not by what others thought of her, but by what she knew to be right. In a world where fear twisted people into shadows of themselves, Luna stood as a quiet beam of clarity, unaffected and unafraid to believe in what others called nonsense. She first stepped into the spotlight of heroism when she joined Dumbledore's army, not out of a thirst for glory, but from a deep sense of what was right. While other students hesitated, Luna, with her serene confidence, became one of the most dedicated members. She trained alongside Harry, Hermione, and Neville, casting Patronuses and learning to fight back against the dark forces that slowly encroached on their lives. "The Aurors are part of the Rotfang conspiracy. I thought everyone knew that," she once said. And while her beliefs amused some, Luna never wavered in her commitment. Her charm was that she didn't need to make sense to others. She only needed to stay true to herself. In the battle at the Department of Mysteries, Luna fought with remarkable courage. She faced Death Eaters in the very heart of the Ministry, where secrets twisted reality into madness. Alongside Ginny, Neville, Ron, Hermione, and Harry, she stood in the chaos, dueling grown wizards trained in cruelty. When Ron was incapacitated and Hermione injured, Luna didn't falter. She was knocked unconscious, yes, but not before she fought bravely in a place that swallowed many stronger minds. This was no mere child caught in a whirlwind. She was a warrior, draped in innocence, unshaken by fear. As Dumbledore later said, "You are a very good friend, Luna," acknowledging what many overlooked, her loyalty and courage, even when unseen. When Hogwarts fell under the iron grip of the Carrows, Luna remained a flicker of hope in the darkness. With Dumbledore gone and the Ministry under Voldemort's control, Luna didn't retreat into silence or safety. She stayed at school and stood against the brutality that poisoned every hallway. The Carrows, known for their cruelty and punishment, turned learning into terror. But Luna, ever calm, refused to bend. She continued to support her fellow students, offering kindness when most had only despair. Her friendship with Neville and Ginny became a lifeline. Together they reopened the Room of Requirement and brought back Dumbledore's army, not as a rebellion in name only, but as a movement of resistance born from truth. Her capture by Death Eaters and subsequent imprisonment in the Malfoy Manor was perhaps one of her most defining moments. Alongside Mr. Ollivander, the Wand-Maker, Luna endured months in captivity, yet never allowed the darkness to devour her light. She comforted Ollivander when he cried in the night. She carved hope into their reality, singing to him, soothing his spirit, and reminding him that goodness still lived, even inside the walls of fear. Hermione, who met Luna there again after being captured herself, was struck by Luna's serenity despite their dire situation. In Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, the narration notes that Luna had the most serene and composed expression, a testament to her internal strength. Most would have broken, but Luna remained whole. It was Luna's knowledge, too, that proved vital when the search for Ravenclaw's lost diadem began. In a moment of clarity that others might have missed, she remembered Helena Ravenclaw's ghost and suggested to Harry that he speak with her. "You've got to talk to someone who's dead," she told him with certainty, her voice calm amidst the storm of final preparations for battle. That insight led Harry to discover the hiding place of one of Voldemort's final Horcruxes. Without Luna, that moment might never have come. Her wisdom, often dismissed as fanciful, held the power to change the course of history when the world needed it most. Even in the chaos of the Battle of Hogwarts, Luna was present, wand in hand, standing beside those she loved. She fought not with vengeance, but with purpose. It was she who helped calm Harry after the loss of Dobby, and it was she who guided him through the noise to find focus. When Harry returned from the Forbidden Forest, having faced death itself, Luna saw him surrounded by admirers and whispered to him, "Come on, Harry, come with me." She understood better than anyone that a hero sometimes needs silence more than cheers. That small gesture spoke volumes about her heart. Luna never sought recognition. Her heroism was not built on grand speeches or front-page headlines. It was in the way she treated others. It was in the way she listened when no one else did, the way she believed in strange truths and invisible threads connecting the universe. Her courage lay in the refusal to become bitter, even when the world gave her every reason. When others gossiped about her father's controversial magazine, The Quibbler, Luna stood by him. She loved him despite his flaws, even after he betrayed Harry under duress. Forgiveness to Luna was not weakness, it was healing. In the Great Hall, after the final battle had been won, Luna sat among the survivors, not weeping or shouting, but offering silent presence. She had lost friends, endured torture, witnessed death. But she did not retreat into anger. Her strength came not from brute power, but from resilience, a soul that could not be corrupted. She was proof that bravery doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers through cracked walls and blood-stained corridors, holding on to hope when there is none. Number 18, Arthur Weasley. Arthur Weasley was not a man of grand speeches or flashy duels, and yet he stood quietly among the ranks of the bravest in the wizarding world. He never sought attention or recognition. He wore second-hand robes, travelled in a battered enchanted car, and worked in a humble office in the misuse of Muggle artifacts department, a post many considered laughable. Yet behind his modesty and awkward charm was a man who resisted evil not only with his wand, but with his values. Arthur Weasley was a quiet hero, one who chose to fight when it would have been easier to stay silent, who never compromised what he believed in, even when the world seemed to be collapsing around him. In the shadow of towering figures like Albus Dumbledore, Sirius Black, and Harry Potter himself, Arthur's courage was not diminished, but rather overlooked. He didn't wield influence, he didn't command armies, and he never tried to. What he did was perhaps harder. He stayed kind, honest, and hopeful in a world becoming darker by the day. While others climbed political ladders or turned their heads from injustice, Arthur joined the Order of the Phoenix, knowing full well that it could cost him his life. He had 7 children to protect, a wife who depended on him, and yet he chose to fight against Voldemort's return, because, to Arthur, doing the right thing was not a question of convenience, it was a matter of principle. His involvement in the Order of the Phoenix was not symbolic. He took active part in guarding the Department of Mysteries, risking his life during night shifts to protect secrets too dangerous to fall into the wrong hands. It was during one of those nights, in the stillness of a corridor filled with silent prophecy orbs, that Arthur was attacked by Voldemort's snake, Nagini. It was not a duel, it was an ambush, savage and terrifying. The attack nearly killed him. Had it not been for Harry's psychic connection to Voldemort, Arthur would have bled to death in the shadows of the Ministry. "He's been badly injured," Dumbledore had said, and yet Arthur survived. Not through magic or miracle, but through will, the will to return to his family, to the cause he had chosen, with full awareness of its dangers. The attack did not break him, it didn't even harden him. When he recovered, Arthur returned not to safety but to resistance. He never exploited his injury, never used it for sympathy or reward. That was never the Weasley way. Instead, he kept on doing his job, kept supporting the Order, and continued to raise his children with the same principles that had guided him all his life. "We are all human, aren't we? Every human life is worth the same and worth saving," said Kingsley Shacklebolt. And Arthur lived that truth. He didn't judge by blood status or wealth. He was fascinated by Muggles, not because they were exotic, but because he saw their ingenuity as something to admire, not mock. In a deeply classist society, that alone was an act of rebellion. Arthur's moral compass was as steady as it was unfashionable. While men like Lucius Malfoy flaunted their wealth and influence at the ministry, Arthur refused to play political games. His disdain for corruption was quiet but resolute. He never allowed himself to be bought or manipulated, even though his family often lived just above the poverty line. He took pride in his honest work. "I've got a few questions to ask you about some Muggle artifacts that were confiscated in your office," said Lucius with veiled contempt in Chamber of Secrets, trying to humiliate Arthur during a ministry encounter. But Arthur didn't lower himself to Malfoy's level. He knew who he was, and that was enough. It would have been easy for a man in Arthur's position to tell his children to keep their heads down, to avoid trouble, to stay safe. But Arthur raised warriors: Bill, who became a curse-breaker and fought with the Order; Charlie, who worked with dragons and stood against Voldemort's rise; Percy, despite his temporary estrangement, came back to fight; Fred and George, fearless and rebellious, ran a joke shop that doubled as a resistance hub; Ron, who stood beside Harry at every turn; Ginny, who led Dumbledore's army and faced off against Death Eaters in the Battle of Hogwarts. These were not coincidences. They were the legacy of a father who showed every single day what integrity looked like. In The Half-Blood Prince, when the ministry finally began to acknowledge Voldemort's return, Arthur did not gloat. He didn't say, "I told you so," to the officials who had dismissed the Order as paranoid or fringe. Instead, he kept working, kept trying to hold things together, kept believing in change. Even as fear gripped the wizarding world, Arthur opened his home to the Order, offering the burrow as a sanctuary. It was in that warm, cluttered house, with its mismatched furniture and magical knitting needles, that many found hope. Arthur turned his home into a fortress of light in a world going dark. During the Battle of the Seven Potters, Arthur again stepped into the line of fire, escorting Harry away from Privet Drive at great risk to his own life. It was a mission designed to confuse Death Eaters, and Arthur was not exempt from danger simply because he was a father. The sky that night was filled with chaos and betrayal, but Arthur did not flinch. When the real Harry was discovered and chaos erupted, he fought with everything he had. The man who once enchanted rubber ducks stood on equal footing with battle-hardened Death Eaters, not because he was the strongest, but because he was the bravest. Arthur's courage was never loud, but it was unmistakable. When the Death Eaters took over the ministry and the world tilted toward tyranny, Arthur kept helping Muggle-borns in secret. He smuggled information, offered aid, and kept his own blood traitor status from putting his entire family at greater risk. He did this without asking for recognition. There was no headline, no fanfare, just Arthur continuing to resist in the only way he knew, by never compromising who he was. Perhaps the most poignant example of his heroism came during the Battle of Hogwarts. As the final war erupted around them, Arthur did not stay behind. He and Molly stood beside their children, ready to die if necessary. When Fred fell, Arthur didn't run, didn't break. He held his family together through unimaginable grief. His son had died in the fight for freedom, and Arthur carried that pain not as a defeat, but as part of the terrible cost of resisting evil. That kind of strength, the ability to keep loving, keep believing, and keep standing, is not the kind found in legends. It is the kind that sustains them. Even as the war ended and the wizarding world began to rebuild, Arthur's legacy did not fade. He had shown that heroism was not the exclusive domain of warriors and prodigies. It belonged to the man who told his children bedtime stories, who enchanted household objects, who stood up to bullies in the ministry, and who welcomed the boy who lived into his family without ever asking for anything in return. Arthur didn't need a prophecy. He didn't need a scar. He had a heart, and that was enough. In Goblet of Fire, when he escorts Harry to the Quidditch World Cup, Arthur doesn't just act as a guardian. He becomes a symbol of how magical and Muggle worlds can coexist. His clumsy but affectionate efforts to understand the Muggle way of life were more than comic relief. They were gestures of peace. In a world so fractured by blood purity and prejudice, Arthur's curiosity was radical. He didn't just tolerate muggles, he admired them. That admiration came not from pity, but from genuine interest. "What exactly is the function of a rubber duck?" he once asked, and it wasn't mockery, it was wonder. He embodied the idea that heroism was not measured by spells cast or enemies defeated, but by how one chose to live each day. In Order of the Phoenix, when Arthur takes Harry to his ministry hearing, he treats the boy with the same care and respect as if he were one of his own. No special treatment, no suspicion, only quiet support. That small gesture in a time when even Dumbledore had distanced himself from Harry mattered. It reminded Harry and the reader that kindness was not weakness, it was resistance. Arthur Weasley was not a perfect man. He was scatterbrained, occasionally oblivious, and often overwhelmed by the scale of the war. But none of that diminished his strength. In fact, it made his courage more real. He had every reason to hide, to step back, to put his family first, and let others fight. But he didn't. He walked into danger, time and again, not because he was fearless, but because he refused to let fear win. His story may not be told in song or celebrated in ministry archives, but it lives in every action he took, every value he upheld, and every life he touched. Arthur Weasley, the man who wore mismatched socks and loved electricity, was a hero, not despite his simplicity, but because of it. In a world of wands and wars, sometimes the greatest power is a good heart that refuses to yield. Number 19. Narcissa Malfoy. In the heart of the Forbidden Forest, under the watchful eyes of Death-Eaters and creatures born of nightmares, a woman stood at the crossroads between darkness and something far more dangerous: hope. Narcissa Malfoy had never worn the title of heroine, nor had she ever sought the praise of others. Her world was built on lineage, loyalty to the Dark Lord, and above all, the safety of her son. And yet, in that pivotal moment when Lord Voldemort asked her to confirm Harry Potter's death, she made a decision that would ripple through history. She bent down, felt the boy's heartbeat beneath her hand, and whispered the question that revealed her truth. "Is Draco alive?" When Harry answered yes, Narcissa rose and lied. Her voice rang clear. "He's dead!" It was a quiet defiance, cloaked in loyalty, a single sentence that carried the weight of a mother's love and the fate of the wizarding world. To understand the magnitude of her act, one must step back from the final battle and examine the intricate web of choices that brought her there. Narcissa had always been portrayed as cold, regal, and distant. A pure-blood witch, raised in the traditions of superiority and obedience, married into a family that served the darkest wizard of the age. She was the sister of Bellatrix Lestrange, Voldemort's most fanatical follower. Yet Narcissa was different. She did not delight in cruelty, nor did she believe blindly. She endured, and she protected. Throughout the series, her actions often appeared aligned with the enemy, but closer inspection reveals a woman maneuvering through a war, tethered not to ideology, but to a boy named Draco. When Draco was tasked with murdering Albus Dumbledore, it was not Lucius who took action. It was Narcissa who stepped into the darkness of Spinner's End, accompanied by her merciless sister. There, she begged Severus Snape for help, not for the cause, but for her son. "He's just a boy," she pleaded. "You're not a mother. You don't understand." These words expose a side of Narcissa rarely seen. Not the elegant aristocrat, but the desperate mother who would betray a war to save her child. Her pact with Snape, sealed with the unbreakable vow, was her first open defiance of Voldemort's will. It was a calculated risk born of love, not rebellion. But it laid the foundation for the greater sacrifice she would make later. Unlike Bellatrix, whose loyalty was fused with madness, or Lucius, who served for power and pride, Narcissa loved in silence. She maneuvered through a world where emotions were liabilities, and yet she allowed her heart to guide her. When Voldemort returned, her family lost its standing. Lucius was disgraced. The Malfoy name, once revered, was tarnished. Narcissa's focus narrowed. With every humiliation, every failure, her concern became more singular: Draco's survival. In the final book, when their home became a prison, and Draco was forced to witness torture and death under his own roof, Narcissa did not flee. She remained, shielding him as best she could, her eyes always watching, calculating, waiting. Then came the Battle of Hogwarts, the final reckoning. Voldemort summoned Harry to die, and Harry, ready to sacrifice himself, walked willingly into the forest. He was struck down by the killing curse, and silence fell upon the clearing. Narcissa was chosen to confirm the result. Why her? Perhaps because Voldemort trusted her, or perhaps because he saw her as nothing more than a loyal pawn. But when she approached Harry, everything changed. She bent down, and in that instant she crossed a threshold that few ever do, betraying the most feared man in existence, not for ideology or revenge, but for her son. Her fingers touched Harry's chest. She felt the faint rhythm of life. She could have screamed the truth and ensured Voldemort's victory. She could have signalled for another spell to finish the job, but instead she asked one question. Is Draco alive? That heartbeat beneath her palm became less important than the answer she sought. Harry whispered yes. And in that moment, Narcissa Malfoy performed the bravest act of her life. She lied to Lord Voldemort, not with a plan, not with resistance, but with hope that if Harry were truly alive, he might help her son survive this war. Her deception allowed Harry to return, gave the defenders of Hogwarts time to regroup, and turned the tide of the battle. It was not Harry's duel with Voldemort that won the war. It was Narcissa's lie that made it possible. Without it, the boy who lived would have been slaughtered in the forest before ever seeing the castle again. Without it, Voldemort's army would have marched on Hogwarts with the full weight of apparent victory. That single moment of maternal instinct became a fulcrum upon which the fate of the wizarding world pivoted. And remarkably, it was not done by a hero in the traditional sense. It was done by a woman who had once stood proudly beside evil, yet whose heart still beat for love. J.K. Rowling's narrative often explores the grey areas of morality, and Narcissa Malfoy stands as a monument to that complexity. She reminds us that heroism can bloom in the most unexpected places, and that courage does not always roar. It sometimes whispers in the face of tyranny. When asked why she lied, the answer lies not in grand speeches or ideology, but in the quiet cry of a mother desperate to see her son again. Narcissa did not become good in the way Dumbledore or Harry defined it. She did not switch sides or fight in the Great Hall, but she did what many others could not. She risked death to save someone she loved, even if it meant helping her enemy. The weight of her choice is reflected in the silence that followed. Voldemort believed her. No Cruciatus curse followed. No suspicion fell upon her shoulders. Perhaps it was her calm demeanour or the aura of aristocratic confidence she never lost. But perhaps deep down even the Dark Lord failed to imagine betrayal could come from someone like Narcissa. She had always been close, always compliant. Her strength lay in her subtlety. And so she walked back from Harry's body, her lie echoing in the minds of those who heard it, her eyes on the horizon, where hope now flickered once more. After the battle, when Voldemort was finally vanquished, the Malfoys did not flee. They did not fight. They simply searched the crowd for Draco. Narcissa's reward was not glory or gratitude, but the sight of her son alive. In that closing scene, as others celebrated victory, the Malfoys stood apart, tarnished, silent, and yet somehow free. Ruling does not spell out their fate, but their survival tells its own story. It is the quiet epilogue to a tale of quiet rebellion. It is easy to praise the obvious heroes, Harry for his bravery, Hermione for her brilliance, Ron for his loyalty. But it is in characters like Narcissa Malfoy that we find the deepest truths of Rowling's world. That love can exist in darkness, that choices define us more than heritage, that even a woman raised in prejudice, married into power, and entangled in war can, at the critical moment, choose the path of compassion. It is a lesson whispered between lines, hinted in gestures, and finally spoken in a lie that saved a life. There is irony in her act. Her lie was the most honest expression of her heart. In a world where truth and lies were weapons, Narcissa used both to protect what mattered most, and unlike others who fought for abstract ideals, she fought for something heartbreakingly personal. It was not about the world, it was about her child, and yet in saving him she saved everyone else too. Her moment with Harry in the forest was not loud or flashy. There was no wand raised, no duel fought, but it remains one of the most pivotal moments in the entire series. That small act of defiance, grounded in maternal love, had consequences greater than any spell. It is a reminder that power does not always reside in magic or strength, but in the quiet choices we make when no one is watching. Narcissa. Malfoy did not need applause. Her victory was personal and profound. Even Harry recognized this truth. In the aftermath of the battle, he did not condemn the Malfoys, he allowed them to walk away. Perhaps he understood that Narcissa's lie had saved not just his life, but the entire war effort. Perhaps he recognized that courage had many faces, and that sometimes even those on the other side had stories of sacrifice. In the end, Narcissa Malfoy did not rewrite the world. She did not lead armies or cast powerful spells. She simply chose to value love over fear and truth over obedience when it mattered most. And for that she stands among the bravest characters in the story, not because she was perfect, but because she chose light in a world of darkness and never looked back. Number 20. Sybill Trelawney. Professor Sybill Trelawney was never the kind of teacher students respected. Wrapped in clouds of sandalwood incense, her eyes always magnified behind her oversized spectacles, she floated through the corridors of Hogwarts like a ghost, convinced of her own divine insight. Most dismissed her. Hermione Granger, known for her practical logic, openly abandoned divination after 2 years. Even Headmaster Dumbledore, who had originally hired Trelawney for reasons beyond her classroom merit, kept a cautious emotional distance. Yet in the quiet shadows of prophecy and war, Trelawney proved that heroism is not always loud, not always recognized, and certainly not always expected. There was a moment, years before anyone understood its weight, when Sybill Trelawney spoke words that shifted the course of wizarding history. In a small room above the Hog's Head Inn, where the dust danced under moonlight, and a young Severus Snape eavesdropped behind the door, she delivered the prophecy that would ultimately link Harry Potter to Lord Voldemort. The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord approaches, born to those who have thrice defied him, born as the 7th month dies. The moment was not a performance. It was raw, unfiltered magic, flowing through a woman often laughed at for pretending. But this time, she wasn't pretending. The prophecy marked Harry as the chosen one. It set into motion every major conflict that followed, from the murder of Lily and James Potter to the final duel in the Great Hall. What is often overlooked is that Trelawney had no memory of making it. She would later say, "I remember nothing, nothing at all," her voice shaky and distant. And yet that utterance from her lips in a genuine moment of second sight held more power than most spells cast during the war. In that instant, Sybill Trelawney was not a fraud, not an eccentric, but a vessel of ancient magic that chose her to speak a future too devastating for the conscious mind to remember. For years, her contribution was buried under layers of incense and crystal balls, but even those who mocked her couldn't ignore the consequences of her vision. Albus Dumbledore, who once said, Her real prophecies are rare, but when they happen, they matter, knew exactly why she had to stay within the walls of Hogwarts. She was more than a teacher. She was a key to a mystery too dangerous to let roam free. Dumbledore protected her not because she was harmless, but because the magic she channeled, rare and unpredictable, was a threat if it fell into the wrong hands. Ironically, it was Severus Snape who ensured her safety when Dolores Umbridge, during her reign of tyranny, attempted to dismiss her publicly. Sybill stood weeping in the courtyard, her trunks spilled, her pride shattered, until Dumbledore arrived and stopped the spectacle. She wasn't just a teacher being evicted. She was the only living link to the prophecy that shaped the destiny of the wizarding world. That moment, though humiliating, marked the beginning of her slow transformation in the eyes of others. By the time the Battle of Hogwarts erupted, no one expected Sybill Trelawney to fight. The castle roared with spells and screams, the marble staircases cracked under the weight of destruction, and students as young as 14 raised their wands in defiance. But there, amid chaos, stood Trelawney. Gone were the shawls and the performance. She took up arms in her own strange way, hurling crystal spheres, each the size of a grapefruit, at the heads of Death Eaters. One sphere knocked out the masked figure of Jugson, sending him tumbling down a staircase. Another shattered over the shoulder of a Death Eater attacking Lavender Brown. Her weapons were not spells, but knowledge of where to stand and how to aim. It was not traditional bravery, but it was bravery nonetheless. She fought alongside the likes of Professor Sprout and Madame Pomfrey, proving that age or reputation meant little in the face of true danger. What is most striking about her role in the battle is the fact that she didn't run. Many staff members could have chosen safety. Some did. But Sybill, who had once predicted Harry's death with theatrical dread, stayed when it truly mattered. In those hours, she wasn't just the divination professor. She was a defender of the children she once terrified with fake omens and grim predictions. In that fight, she crossed paths with Fenrir Greyback, the savage werewolf who fed on fear and flesh. While it's unclear whether she was responsible for his retreat, students later said that a glass orb cracked near his feet, unleashing a mist so blinding that he lost his prey. Some believe that mist was simply shattered crystal. Others say it was enchanted by Sybill herself, finally channeling her magic in a way she had never been trained to do. Either way, she survived. And those she helped survive too. Her bravery was not the kind sung about in ballads. She was no Harry Potter, no Minerva McGonagall, but she proved that courage can wear many faces. She taught that you don't need to be young, strong, or respected to make a difference. You just need to be there when it counts. Sybill Trelawney, the woman who once predicted the grim in a teacup, ended up throwing visions of death into the enemy's path. Only this time, they were real, and they fought back. Even in the aftermath, she returned to teaching. It would have been easy to disappear, to let the trauma dissolve her completely. But Sybill returned to her tower, her voice still trembling with mysticism, her steps still theatrical, her perfume still overwhelming. Yet now, when she looked at her students, her gaze was a little steadier. Not because she had changed, but because everyone else had finally seen her for what she was, a misunderstood guardian, cloaked in lace and riddles, but fierce when fate demanded it. Her greatest triumph, perhaps, was that she never tried to be a hero. She didn't raise her voice to claim credit for the prophecy. She didn't ask anyone to remember her aim with the crystal balls. She simply drifted back into the clouds of her incense, eyes wide, heart quiet. But Harry Potter remembered. When he looked back at the war, he often recalled the moments of quiet strength, the unsung, the unexpected, the ones who stood tall not because they were asked to, but because they knew in their bones that they must. In a world obsessed with bold declarations and one-to-one duels, Sibyl's impact was spiritual. She channeled something older than textbooks and more sacred than tactical defense. Her predictions, when true, were doorways to truths that no spell could unlock. When she said, "The spirits have spoken," people used to roll their eyes. But after the war, even the most skeptical paused before laughing, because once the spirits did speak through her, and the world shattered in the echo. She remains one of the most peculiar figures in the annals of Hogwarts history. A woman who cried easily, dressed extravagantly, and hid behind performance, but who, in two separate moments, held the fate of the world in her fragile hands. First, when she spoke a prophecy she couldn't remember. Then when she fought in a battle she never trained for. In both, she did not falter. In both, she was exactly what the world needed. The story of Sybill Trelawney is not one of redemption because she never sinned. It is not one of transformation because she was always this way. It is a story of perception, how a figure once dismissed as absurd revealed herself to be extraordinary. The war against Voldemort revealed the true hearts of many, and Sibyl's heart, wrapped in velvet and glass, beat with more strength than anyone knew. Her legacy, often overlooked, rests not in the pages of standard Hogwarts curriculum, but in the silences between battles, in the shadows where prophecy lives, and in the cracked orbs that once told the future. Perhaps they still do. Perhaps her tower still hums with the remnants of a voice that once shook the stars. Trelawney once said, "You may be young in years, but the heart that beats beneath your bosom is as shriveled as an old maid's." It was meant as an insult, but it revealed how deeply she saw into others, even if no one believed her. She saw things others couldn't, and when darkness came, she used what little she had to fight it. With trembling hands, with crystal spheres, and with a spirit no Dark Lord could ever predict. Number 21, Andromeda Tonks. Andromeda Tonks was born into the noble and most ancient House of Black, a family notorious for its obsession with blood purity and its allegiance to the dark arts. Her sisters, Narcissa and Bellatrix, embodied everything their lineage valued: elegance, ambition, and ruthless pride. Bellatrix in particular became a symbol of cruelty and madness, a fanatic who worshipped Lord Voldemort with blind devotion. Narcissa, although more composed, remained loyal to her family's ideology, marrying Lucius Malfoy and raising Draco within the same traditions of supremacy. Yet Andromeda, the middle sister, quietly shattered the mold, and in doing so became the one true heroine of the Black Sisters, not through battle or spells, but through love, loss, and the quiet defiance of dignity. Her greatest act of rebellion was not loud or violent, it was her heart. She fell in love with a Muggle-born wizard, Ted Tonks, an act considered not only scandalous but unforgivable in the eyes of her family. The Blacks did not tolerate deviation. To love someone like Ted was, in their view, a betrayal of everything they held sacred. When Andromeda married him, she was disowned, and her name was blasted off the Black family tapestry. She was erased, as though her existence had been a stain too dark to bear. But where others saw disgrace, Andromeda saw liberation. She chose love over fear, kindness over cruelty, and truth over the illusions of inherited pride. It would have been easy to crumble under the weight of exile. Andromeda grew up in a world of elegance and wealth, surrounded by ancestral pride and magical grandeur. To be stripped of that, and to walk away from it, demanded a courage that no spell could conjure. She was no Gryffindor, no celebrated warrior. She never raised a wand against Death Eaters in a dramatic duel. Yet she sacrificed more than most. Her heroism was not made for headlines. It bloomed in silence, like a candle in the dark. Years passed and she built a home with Ted. Together they raised a daughter, Nymphadora Tonks, who grew up to become a fierce an unconventional aura. Andromeda might have been exiled by the Blacks, but she passed on to her daughter something the noble family had long forgotten: the strength to be true to oneself. Tonks, with her ever-changing hair and defiant spirit, became a symbol of individuality, a mirror of the woman who raised her. The legacy of Andromeda's quiet defiance lived on in her child's laughter and bravery. There was no family crest for that kind of nobility, but it shone brighter than any. The Second Wizarding War brought the shadows back to Andromeda's life. The same evil her sisters had embraced returned in full force. Bellatrix, now a feared lieutenant of Voldemort, was no longer just a sister who made different choices. She was a murderer. The gulf between them had widened into a chasm of fire. Andromeda's world began to collapse when Ted was hunted down and killed by Death Eaters for being a Muggle-born. She received the news not from an official owl, but in whispers through fear-laced reports. His death was not a noble sacrifice on a battlefield. It was another silent blow, the kind that breaks hearts. Then came the Battle of Hogwarts. Nymphadora and her husband, Remus Lupin, left their newborn son with Andromeda and walked into the storm. They never came back. Tonks fell in battle, and so did Remus. The cost of the war was not only counted in gravestones, but in the shattered families left behind. Andromeda, once a daughter of a grand house, now stood alone, a widow, a mother without her child, and the only guardian left to a baby boy who would never know his parents. And yet she did not collapse. She took Teddy Lupin in her arms, this small, fragile life, and she did what few could do. She endured. In a world soaked with grief and scorched by war, she held on to the one thing that had never failed her: her love. She did not ask for glory. She did not cry out for help. She simply became the child's world. There are no parades for women like Andromeda, no chocolate frog cards, no grand speeches from the ministry, but in her home she became a fortress. The books never linger on her story, but its outline is there for those who look. After the war, Harry Potter himself, godfather to Teddy, entrusted Andromeda with the boy's care. He, who had known the sting of growing up unwanted, knew there could be no better guardian than the woman who had chosen love over legacy. As described in Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, he knew that Andromeda, who had lost a husband and a daughter, was taking care of little Teddy Lupin. Andromeda didn't just babysit. She became his family, the center of his new universe. She could have become bitter. She had every reason to. Her sisters had helped destroy the world. Her family had shunned her. The war had taken everything she loved, but instead she poured her soul into a new beginning. There was no fanfare in raising a child, no magical reward. But she made a choice every day to show Teddy the kind of love that had once torn her from her own blood. And that is where her heroism lies, in the daily courage to wake up, to cook, to comfort, to teach, to love again. In contrast, look at Narcissa. She too made a choice during the Battle of Hogwarts when she lied to Voldemort about Harry's death to protect her son. It was an act of maternal love, and it helped turn the tide of the war. But Narcissa returned to her manor, to her titles, and to the wreckage of her social world. Bellatrix died with a mad gleam in her eye, struck down by Molly Weasley. Neither sister was left with the weight Andromeda carried. They were remembered as villains or anomalies. Andromeda was forgotten because she never asked to be remembered. But perhaps that is what makes her story so powerful. She represents the quiet strength that sustains the world after the heroes fall. She is the healer after the battle, the embrace after the final curse is cast. Her love did not burn like fire. It endured like stone. In the epilogue of the Deathly Hallows, Teddy is shown to be happy, healthy, and deeply loved. He has colour-changing hair and visits with Harry's family. Somewhere off the page, Andromeda remains his anchor. If Bellatrix was the face of fanaticism, Andromeda was the soul of resilience. One destroyed what she touched, the other rebuilt it. And while Bellatrix died shouting her master's name, Andromeda lived on, quietly, bravely, and fully human. She did not need to wear a badge or carry a wand into battle to be a hero. She simply refused to let the darkness take the last of her light. One can only imagine the grief she must have felt, rocking Teddy in the quiet hours of the night, her hands shaking with memory. But she didn't let that grief define the boy's life. He grew up loved. He grew up whole. That was her magic. That was her triumph. In a world of scars and sorrow, Andromeda Tonks stood as a living defiance to despair. It is tempting to seek heroism in the roar of battle, in grand gestures and magical duels, but the truest courage, as Andromeda showed, often happens in kitchens and nurseries, in whispered lullabies and strong embraces. She gave up everything, wealth, status, family, to live with her heart unchained. And when the world turned cruel again, she gave the last of herself to someone who needed her more than anyone else. Her story reminds us that true heroism doesn't always wear a cloak. Sometimes it's dressed in grief, carrying a baby through the ruins of a broken world, and choosing love again and again, no matter how much it hurts. That is the legacy Andromeda Tonks leaves behind. That is the kind of magic that saves the world, one quiet act at a time. Number 22. Garrick Ollivander. He had always been there, tucked away in the quiet shadows of Diagon Alley, surrounded by the whispering hum of ancient wood and phoenix feather. When Harry Potter first stepped into Ollivander's as an 11-year-old boy, he met not just a merchant, but a guardian of a much older magic, a keeper of secrets older than Hogwarts itself. Garrick Ollivander was not a man of grand gestures or flamboyant spells. His power was quiet, his role unassuming. But in the final reckoning, when the world teetered between light and darkness, it was Ollivander's strength, knowledge, and courage that tipped the scales. When the Second Wizarding War erupted, the wizarding world fractured into fear and silence. Many fled, others took sides. But Ollivander, the legendary wand-maker, became a target. He had knowledge Voldemort craved, insight into the deepest magic of wands, why they chose certain wizards, how allegiance shifted, how cause responded to will and character. The Dark Lord, obsessed with domination and with a specific wand's betrayal, saw Ollivander not as a craftsman, but as a key. And so the Death Eaters came, cloaked in cruelty, and took him. They did not imprison him in Azkaban, where the despair was a byproduct of the Dementors. No, Ollivander was dragged to the basement of Malfoy Manor, a place reeking of blood, dust, and ancient rot. It was not just a prison, it was a dungeon designed for torment. There, Voldemort's followers sought to extract knowledge from the old man by force. He was starved, beaten, left in darkness. His only companions were the stone walls and his own mind, which they sought to shatter. And yet he endured. For months he resisted. He refused to betray the very essence of what made a wand, its loyalty, its mystery, its bond to the wizard. He could have broken. Few would have blamed him. He was not a young man. He had no wand of his own, no means of defense. But his silence became an act of rebellion, and his defiance an anchor for what was left of honor in a world where even the sacred had been desecrated. His refusal frustrated his captors, but it gave hope to the silent magic that still resisted Voldemort's control. Ollivander did not just survive, he observed. He listened to the murmurs of Bellatrix Lestrange's fury, to Lucius Malfoy's desperation, to the plans whispered in the gloom. He remembered every word. And when Dobby the elf brought Harry, Ron, and Hermione to that grim place in a blaze of courage and desperation, Ollivander recognized that the tide could change. After months of captivity, when they rescued him from the manor's pit, he was emaciated and weak. His eyes, once sharp with silver curiosity, were hollow. But his spirit was not broken. Harry needed him, not as a wand salesman, but as a sage. The boy who had first stumbled into Ollivander's so many years before now returned, bloodied and hunted, carrying the weight of prophecy and war. He needed to understand why his wand had acted of its own accord against Voldemort, how the twin cores had collided, and what the Elder Wand meant. And Ollivander, lying in bed at Shell Cottage, whispered truths with the weight of centuries behind them. "He took my wand," Ollivander confessed, referring to Voldemort. "He tortured me. He wanted information." His voice, though frail, carried more impact than a shout. He explained the fates of Gregorovitch and the myth of the Deathly Hallows. He spoke of the Elder Wand's history, of its allegiance, and of the trail of death it left behind. And though he admitted he had told Voldemort what he knew, his honesty became his final act of resistance. He ensured Harry understood what Voldemort never could. In those moments, Ollivander revealed a truth deeper than spells, that magic, without understanding, without soul, is empty. Voldemort believed he could force loyalty, that possession equaled mastery. Ollivander knew better. "The wand chooses the wizard," he had said to Harry long ago. And now he helped Harry realize that true mastery wasn't about theft, it was about worthiness. It was Ollivander who confirmed the Elder Wand would never truly serve Voldemort, because its allegiance had changed. He planted the seed that led Harry to understand what he had to do. It was not just technical knowledge, it was spiritual. Ollivander's insight into wands was not mechanical, but philosophical. He understood that each wand bore part of its master's essence. He had once refused to sell Bellatrix a second wand because hers had become so uniquely attuned to her cruelty. He had warned against the substitution of one wand for another, not because it was impractical, but because it was unnatural. His entire life had been a study of this bond, and even after the worst horrors, he clung to that truth. What makes a hero? It is not only bravery in battle or the casting of powerful spells. Sometimes it is the ability to hold firm in the face of despair, to preserve truth when it would be easier to lie. Ollivander, a quiet man who never sought attention, became a symbol of resistance, not because he wielded a wand in war, but because he refused to let Voldemort desecrate what he knew to be sacred. In a war where truth was twisted and loyalty shattered, Ollivander remained pure. Harry trusted him. Despite everything, despite the fact that he had revealed information under torture, Harry saw his humanity. In fact, it was Ollivander's guilt that proved his soul remained intact. He was not a weapon Voldemort had used. He was a man who had survived, who had endured, and who had passed on the knowledge that would guide the boy who lived toward the final reckoning. When Harry entered the Forbidden Forest to meet his death, he did so not only armed with the Resurrection Stone, but with the certainty that Voldemort's wand would never truly answer him. That knowledge came from Ollivander. When Harry later disarmed Draco and became the true master of the Elder Wand, it was Ollivander's teaching that allowed him to understand its significance. The wand had passed not to the killer, but to the conqueror of will. That insight shaped Harry's final choice, to return the Elder Wand to Dumbledore's tomb and end its legacy of violence. In this way, Ollivander's influence reached beyond the battlefield. He became part of the moral compass that shaped Harry's final decision. He taught that not all power is meant to be used, that reverence, restraint, and understanding are more powerful than brute force. And in that moment, as Harry snapped the wand in two, the old wandmaker's legacy was sealed, not in bloodshed, but in peace. Garrick Ollivander never stood on the front lines. He did not lead armies or duel Death Eaters, but his role was no less vital. He stood at the crossroads of magic and ethics, of knowledge and suffering. He survived the darkness not to escape it, but to bear witness and to teach. And in doing so he became more than a craftsman. He became a guardian. In the tapestry of the wizarding world's final battle, Ollivander was a thread easily overlooked, yet one without which the whole design would have unravelled. His wisdom gave Harry clarity. His pain gave Harry perspective. His courage, quiet and relentless, gave the resistance hope. No statue bears his name, no tale sings of his strength. But every wand still whispers his truth, that magic, like people, must choose to serve the right. Master. In the aftermath, when Hogwarts stood bruised but unbroken, few spoke of the wand-maker who had been taken and returned. Yet his presence lingered in every moment of resolution. He had reminded them all that even the smallest light, when held with steady hands, can push back the darkest shadow. Number 23, Cho Chang. Cho Chang's name rarely stands out in discussions about heroism in the wizarding world. Overshadowed by the likes of Harry Potter, Hermione Granger, and Neville Longbottom, she is often remembered only as Harry's romantic interest or Cedric Diggory's grieving girlfriend. But Cho's journey tells a quieter, subtler tale, one of loss, resilience, and the kind of bravery that is not shouted from rooftops but whispered in the choices a person makes when no one is watching. After Cedric's death in the graveyard in Goblet of Fire, Cho's world collapses. Yet instead of vanishing into grief, she begins to rebuild herself with trembling but determined hands. Cedric's death, brutal and sudden, could have broken anyone. For Cho, it wasn't just the loss of a boyfriend. Cedric was her friend, her confidant, her partner, in a world that was increasingly darkening. He was also a symbol of hope and decency in Hogwarts, a student who won respect not through arrogance, but by simply being kind and capable. When he died at Voldemort's return, Cho didn't merely lose someone she loved, she lost a version of the future that had felt secure. In Order of the Phoenix, she steps into her 5th year, carrying grief like a second skin, and yet, remarkably, she does not retreat. It is in this dark chapter that Cho makes a pivotal choice. Despite the trauma, despite the whispers and pitying glances, she joins Dumbledore's army. When Harry, Ron, and Hermione begin forming the secret group in response to Dolores Umbridge's totalitarian grip over the school, Cho doesn't hesitate. Her decision to join is not just political, it is personal. She knows that Cedric died not in an accident, but because Voldemort had returned, and the Ministry refused to see it. By joining the DA, Cho silently declares that Cedric's death will not be in vain. It's an act of personal rebellion and a statement of belief. Within the Room of Requirement, Cho trains alongside other students, practicing spells, learning defenses, sharpening her reflexes. She does not lead the group, she does not become a prodigy, but she shows up consistently, willingly, despite the pain. That kind of steady presence, particularly when the world seems senseless, is a quiet heroism in itself. As Hermione notes, we're not just learning spells, we're fighting for what's right. Cho understands this deeply. Her grief has not dulled her sense of justice, it has intensified it. What makes her journey compelling is not perfection, but complexity. She cries during training sessions, struggles to talk about Cedric, and even inadvertently causes strain when her friend Marietta Edgecombe betrays the group to Umbridge. Cho tries to defend Marietta out of loyalty, but the situation becomes muddled. Many fans judge her harshly for this, but in truth it only underscores the emotional tightrope she's walking. Loyalty, friendship, grief, and justice all collide in her actions. She does not always navigate them flawlessly, but the effort, the moral tug-of-war, makes her real. J.K. Rowling gives Cho few chances to shine with traditional heroics. She isn't dueling Death Eaters in the Ministry or charging through the Forbidden Forest, but in Half-Blood Prince, when many students leave Hogwarts or withdraw from resistance altogether, Cho remains engaged. She chooses to return to the school during the Battle of Hogwarts. She doesn't have to. As a former student who's already graduated, she could have stayed home, stayed safe. But she comes back to fight. She chooses danger, and in that choice, she affirms her values. In Deathly Hallows, Cho reappears at the precise moment when everything teeters on collapse. Voldemort controls the Ministry. Snape rules Hogwarts. Terror is no longer a distant possibility. It is the daily norm. And yet Cho re-enters the fray. Her reappearance isn't cinematic or grand. It's mentioned briefly, but it matters. Cho Chang wanted to go with Harry to the Ravenclaw common room. The book says, a single sentence nestled between chaos and urgency. And yet in that sentence we see a woman who once cried in training, now volunteering for mission work in the final battle. Even in that moment, her motivations are layered. She's a Ravenclaw. She knows the tower. She wants to help. Perhaps she still cares for Harry, but more than anything, she wants to act. She's no longer the girl who mourns. She's the woman who fights. Her courage is not the kind that arrives with a roar, but with a steady heartbeat. She moves through fear, through history, through memory. She has seen what evil takes, and she chooses again to stand in its path. It is telling that Cho fights alongside former classmates and students much younger than her. In doing so, she demonstrates that the battle for good is not limited to one generation. She returns not because she is expected to, but because her conscience calls her. In a story where many adults turned away, where even the Ministry turned cowardly, Cho's return is a small, blazing light in a sea of shadow. She is not part of the Golden Trio, and yet she is one of the many who make the final stand possible. Her actions are mirrored in how others view her. Luna Lovegood, a character who sees the world's emotional undercurrents with unique clarity, never mocks or belittles Cho. She treats her with warmth and understanding. This subtle endorsement speaks volumes. Luna, who is often written off as eccentric, has an emotional wisdom many others lack. Her respect for Cho implies that Cho's grief, courage, and decisions are not only valid, but deeply important. There's also something powerful in the way Cho continues to believe in love. After Cedric, after Harry, she does not close herself off from others. She does not become bitter. Rowling never gives us a full, post-war account of Cho's life, but we know from interviews and expanded canon that she eventually marries a Muggle. This too is an act of hope, a bridge between worlds, a testament that she has not let trauma define her. She builds a life beyond war. Survival too is heroism. Cho's bravery lies in her emotional openness. In a world where strength is often defined as stoicism or rage, Cho shows that tears do not weaken you. Vulnerability, in fact, requires more courage than armor. She allows herself to grieve Cedric publicly. She allows herself to be affected by love, to be confused, to hurt. But she also picks herself up, again and again. That's a kind of strength we rarely celebrate, yet it is vital for any resistance. Harry's own recollection of her reflects this complexity. Though their relationship ends awkwardly, he never speaks of her with contempt. He understands that they were both grieving in different ways. When he sees her again, there is no bitterness, only recognition. In that moment, Rowling invites the reader to reevaluate Cho not as an ex-girlfriend, but as a fellow warrior. Not all battles are fought with wands. Some are fought with forgiveness, with endurance, with holding on to humanity amid horror. In the grand tapestry of the war against Voldemort, Cho's thread is delicate, but it holds. She reminds us that not all heroes come roaring into battle with spells flying. Some arrive with trembling hands, eyes red from crying, but hearts steadfast. She represents the students who weren't chosen ones, who didn't receive prophecies, but still chose to resist. She fought in classrooms and corridors, in friendships and fears, with quiet resilience. It is easy to overlook characters like Cho Chang, but that would be a mistake. because in a world torn apart by evil, every small act of courage adds up. Cho's heroism is not about spectacle, it's about survival with dignity, grief with purpose, and love that continues despite everything, and that, perhaps, is the bravest thing of all. Number 24. Colin Creevey. Colin Creevey was never meant to be a hero, at least not in the way most imagined them. He was a small boy with a camera hanging from his neck, wide-eyed and constantly chattering. His first appearance at Hogwarts was marked by an uncontrollable enthusiasm for everything magical, and above all, an unshakable admiration for Harry Potter. "I'm Colin Creevey," he had said, eyes sparkling. "I'm in Gryffindor too. Do you think it would be all right if I had a picture?" His obsession with capturing memories made him the object of jokes. Some rolled their eyes, others found him exasperating, but beneath that eager, awkward smile was a heart more courageous than most would ever realize. He didn't grow up in a wizarding family. Colin was Muggle-born, the son of a milkman. Magic was as foreign and dazzling to him as the stars in the night sky. Hogwarts for him was not just a school, it was a miracle. Every hallway, every moving stair, every talking portrait was a wonder. And in Harry Potter he saw not only a hero but a living embodiment of the impossible. Yet his admiration was never about fame or glory. It was rooted in gratitude. Colin revered Harry because Harry had somehow survived, fought, and stood up against darkness, and that gave him hope that even someone like him, a small boy with no magical lineage, could one day matter. When Dolores Umbridge seized power and her inquisitorial squad turned Hogwarts into a cold, regimented place, Colin didn't fade into the background. He joined Dumbledore's army, despite being younger and less experienced than many others. He came to the room of requirement, clutching his wand tightly, determined to learn. The odds were never in his favor. His spells were weak at first, his posture uncertain, but he never stopped trying. Under the quiet guidance of Harry and the loyal presence of his brother Dennis, Colin trained. He trained not because he was expected to, but because he wanted to. He wanted to help. That was who Colin was. When Dumbledore died and the Carrows took control of Hogwarts, the school became a battlefield in disguise. Students were tortured for disobedience. Detention became synonymous with pain. Many kept their heads down, some left, but Colin stayed. Though Muggle-borns were hunted and many disappeared, he risked everything just to remain. His name was on the list. He wasn't even supposed to be at Hogwarts anymore. And yet, in the final hours, when Neville Longbottom began to rally those still loyal to the cause, Colin returned. He snuck back into the castle, past the Death Eaters, the patrols, and the protective enchantments. He came not to hide, but to fight. The night of the Battle of Hogwarts was thick with fear. The castle shook. Spells collided like lightning across the great hall. Giants tore through stone walls. Acromantulas crawled from the forbidden forest. But somewhere in that chaos, Colin fought. A boy with a camera who had always stood on the edges of history now stood in the middle of it. He could have run. He could have stayed safe, hidden away in the shelter where the underage students had been sent. But Colin had made a choice. He would not let others bear the burden of war alone, not when he could do something, anything, to help. There are no grand stories written about how he died. There is no detailed account of the last curse he cast, or the Death Eater he may have stunned. What we know is painfully simple. He was found lifeless in the great hall, his small frame too still, his eyes forever closed. It was Oliver Wood who carried his body inside. Oliver, once captain of the Gryffindor Quidditch team, now a soldier of the Resistance, brought Colin back in his arms, his face grim and silent. The book says, Colin Creevey, though underage, had sneaked back into the castle. He had died in the battle, and his body was recovered, pale and cold, in the great hall. That line alone is enough to shatter something inside. Colin's death was not a footnote. It was a statement. In a war where giants and legends clashed, it was the quiet bravery of a young boy that reminded everyone what they were fighting for. Colin had no power, no prestige, no famous lineage. What he had was conviction. He believed in the right thing, and he was willing to die for it. His sacrifice echoed louder than any victory. It pierced through the false image of heroism shaped by strength and grandeur, because Colin wasn't strong, he wasn't powerful, but he was brave, and sometimes that's all that matters. His story is not about magical duels or heroic speeches. It's about a boy who was told he didn't belong, who was marked by society as lesser because of his birth, and who still chose to stand and fight. His life was about moments, photographs, laughter, determination. But his death, it was about legacy. Colin showed that heroism is not something you earn with age or skill. It's a decision. It's the act of stepping forward when everyone else steps back. It's refusing to accept that you're too small to make a difference. In the aftermath, as the bodies were laid out and the wounded tended to, Colin's name was one among many. But those who knew him, even briefly, felt the weight of his absence. His camera, once flashing with joy and curiosity, was now silent. Yet in those countless photographs he took, snapshots of students smiling, laughing, living, Colin had already preserved the spirit of Hogwarts. He had captured what was worth fighting for. There's something haunting in the idea that Colin died fighting for a place he was once told he had no right to be in. The irony is cruel, but the courage is unforgettable. He had seen the best in Hogwarts, and he refused to let it fall into darkness. He gave his life not just for his friends, but for every student who would come after him, every child who would open a Hogwarts letter and feel, like he once did, that they had entered a world of wonder. Colin fought for that future. It is easy to forget the young in war, to see them as bystanders, to protect them from the fire while the elders take the blows. But sometimes it is the youngest who teach the rest what real bravery looks like. Colin didn't ask for recognition. He didn't need applause. His final act was silent, unseen by most, unrecorded by history. But it was enough. It was everything. In the shadow of Voldemort's tyranny, Colin lit a spark, and that spark did not go unnoticed. In the years that followed, when Hogwarts was rebuilt and peace restored, perhaps a photo or two remained, faded but clear. A laughing boy with messy hair, a girl with frizzy curls, and, somewhere in the corner, Colin himself, smiling, watching, remembering. His photos may have been the first record of Harry's life at Hogwarts, but they were also a record of something deeper, the joy of belonging, the beauty of innocence, and the strength of choosing light over darkness. Those who dismissed Colin as a nuisance never truly saw him. They saw the noise, not the soul, but Dumbledore once said, "It is our choices that show what we truly are, far more than our abilities." Colin chose courage, he chose loyalty. And in doing so, he became more than just a footnote. He became a symbol, not of war, but of hope. Not of loss, but of meaning. He was one boy among many, but he mattered. He always did. Colin's legacy lives not in monuments or medals, but in memory. In the quiet recognition that even the smallest among us can make the greatest stand. His life reminds us that being brave is not about age, power, or fame. It's about showing up, about fighting for what's right, even when you're afraid, even when no one expects you to. Especially then. Number 25, Kingsley Shacklebolt. Kingsley Shacklebolt stood in the heart of every resistance movement like a steady flame in a sea of shadows. While others burned hot with rage or flickered with fear, he remained calm, composed, and calculating. Few could match his poise under pressure. As an aura, he had faced horrors most witches and wizards couldn't imagine. But it wasn't just his dueling prowess or his high-ranking position in the ministry that defined him. It was the way he used both, quietly, deliberately, to shield the innocent and expose the corrupted. When Dumbledore sought allies for the Order of the Phoenix, Kingsley didn't hesitate. He knew that Voldemort's return wasn't merely a matter of dark magic. It was a test of integrity, of justice, of what the wizarding world truly valued. During the dark times when the Ministry chose to deny Voldemort's return, Kingsley lived a double life. He publicly served the very system that refused to see the threat, while secretly feeding intelligence to the Order. His ability to mask his true allegiance required more than just cleverness, it required nerve. He managed to be assigned to the task force charged with finding Sirius Black, and yet it was Kingsley who subtly directed attention away from the fugitive, knowing full well Sirius was innocent. It was a balancing act on the edge of a knife. To the Ministry, he was the model aura. To the Order, he was a critical source of insider information. As Tonks once noted, if you want something done without setting off fireworks, Kingsley's your man. The night of the Battle of the Department of Mysteries proved Kingsley's mettle on the battlefield. Facing Death Eaters among the spinning prophecies and veil of death, Kingsley fought with remarkable precision. He duelled Bellatrix Lestrange, one of Voldemort's most lethal supporters, and held his ground. Despite her madness, Bellatrix was no easy foe. She had already killed Sirius Black during the battle, and yet Kingsley stayed composed, not allowing grief or fury to disrupt his focus. As Rowling wrote, Kingsley Shacklebolt bald head gleamed in the light of the cursed prophecies as he deflected Bellatrix's hex with a sweep of his wand. That moment captured his essence, professional, fierce, but never rash. When the Second Wizarding War intensified, Kingsley didn't disappear into bureaucracy. On the contrary, he became one of the key participants in the most dangerous mission of the Order, Operation Seven Potters. The operation was a desperate attempt to move Harry from Privet Drive to safety, with 6 decoys created using Polyjuice Potion. Death Eaters ambushed them in the skies. Kingsley was tasked with escorting Hermione disguised as Harry. As one of the strongest duelists in the Order, his role was pivotal. The skies erupted in green and red light, but Kingsley didn't falter. While others lost lives that night, including Mad-Eye Moody, Kingsley kept his charge alive. His reflexes, spells, and instincts kept Hermione safe and ensured the operation wasn't a complete disaster. Afterwards, when Voldemort's grip tightened around every institution, Kingsley didn't run. Even as the Ministry was taken over, he continued his resistance from the shadows. He provided information, shelter, and guidance to other rebels. It would have been easy to disappear, to survive quietly until the storm passed, but Kingsley never chose comfort over duty. He was one of the few figures whose presence alone inspired trust. At Bill and Fleur's wedding, just before chaos broke out, Kingsley managed to send a Patronus into the crowded hall, a lynx glowing with urgency. "The Ministry has fallen. Scrimgeour is dead. They are coming." It was a moment of sheer terror, but thanks to his warning, many lives were saved. Even in crisis, he thought of others first. Kingsley's courage wasn't limited to duels and danger. After Voldemort's defeat, the real challenge began, rebuilding the broken world. The Ministry had been complicit in lies, corruption, and bloodshed. Trust was shattered. Into this mess stepped Kingsley Shacklebolt. Appointed interim Minister of Magic, he faced an uphill battle. But his reputation, earned through bravery, clarity, and consistency, gave him legitimacy that others lacked. He began reforms that rooted out entrenched bigotry. He purged the Ministry of known Death Eater sympathizers and began recruiting auras based on merit, not blood status. It was not glamorous work. It was meticulous, painful, and essential. Where other heroes faded after victory, Kingsley rose. His leadership wasn't about ego. He never sought applause, but under his guidance, the wizarding world began to believe in justice again. He advocated for the rights of Muggleborns, increased transparency in the Wizengamot, and gave ex-Order members positions of influence. For too long, power had been hoarded by a privileged few. Kingsley broke that pattern with quiet authority. As Rowling confirmed in later interviews, under Kingsley's rule the Ministry became a much more inclusive and fair place. His brand of heroism wasn't loud, but it was lasting. Even during the darkest nights, Kingsley understood the importance of communication. His speeches weren't long or poetic, but they resonated because he spoke the truth. At Dumbledore's funeral, though he didn't speak publicly, Kingsley's silent presence beside the casket told its own story. He had served beside Dumbledore, protected Harry, fought Death Eaters, and now bore the burden of leading in his mentor's absence. When so many others let grief paralyze them, Kingsley turned pain into purpose. He wasn't just a soldier of light, he was a builder of better tomorrows. One of Kingsley's greatest strengths was that he never let himself be consumed by hatred. Even after witnessing the horrors Voldemort unleashed, the murders, the torture, the betrayal, Kingsley never became bitter. He believed in justice, not vengeance. When trials began for captured Death Eaters, Kingsley insisted on due process. Some wanted executions, others wanted exile. Kingsley demanded trials even for those who had targeted him personally. He understood that real peace came not through revenge, but through principle. "We cannot become what we fought," he once said in official transcripts. Unlike many others, Kingsley had no bloodline to hide behind. He didn't come from an ancient wizarding family, nor did he rely on fame. His rise was earned through action, not ancestry. In a world where pure blood privilege still influenced decisions, Kingsley's ascent sent a clear message. Competence and character mattered more than lineage. That, in itself, was revolutionary. By the time he was made permanent Minister of Magic, even former skeptics admitted that the ministry had never been led by someone so grounded in ethics. The corruption that once flourished in the shadows began to wither in the light Kingsley brought. Throughout the series, many heroes stood beside Harry Potter, but few offered the combination of wisdom, strength, and humility that Kingsley embodied. He didn't seek to mentor Harry like Dumbledore, nor did he act as a sibling figure like Ron. Instead, he remained a stabilizing force, a symbol of what maturity and moral clarity looked like in action. When Harry, Ron, and Hermione finally emerged from hiding, Kingsley didn't scold them. He simply asked what they had learned. He treated them as adults. That respect helped bridge the generational gap that had long plagued magical governance. Kingsley's ability to lead was closely tied to his understanding of fear. As an Auror, he had learned early that fear can be used by tyrants, by mobs, by cowards. But he never exploited fear, he calmed it. He reminded people that strength didn't come from domination, but from unity. In his very demeanor, composed, authoritative, and quietly kind, Kingsley embodied the leadership that Voldemort could never understand. That contrast was crucial. Voldemort ruled through terror. Kingsley led through trust. The final months of the war revealed just how indispensable Kingsley had become. When Hogwarts became the site of the final stand, he coordinated order movements, helped organize reinforcements, and joined the defense himself. He was seen dueling multiple Death Eaters in the castle halls. In the aftermath of victory, when emotions ran high and revenge surged in many, it was Kingsley who maintained order. He protected prisoners, consoled the grieving, and began preparing emergency infrastructure for healing. While others celebrated, Kingsley went back to work. The war might have ended, but the battle for justice had just begun. Years later, those who lived through the war would remember many names: Harry, Hermione, Ron, Neville. But when they spoke of steadiness, of quiet, unwavering resolve in the face of chaos, they always mentioned Kingsley Shacklebolt. His name became synonymous with integrity. Not because he shouted the loudest, but because he stood the longest. In a world of shifting allegiances and broken institutions, Kingsley never wavered. He didn't just help save the world from Voldemort, he helped rebuild it afterward, stronger, kinder, and more just than before. Number 26, Lily Potter. In the dimly lit nursery of Godric's Hollow, while shadows loomed outside and death itself ascended the stairs, Lily Potter made a choice that would echo through time. It was not a decision made with the wand, but with the heart. She stood before her infant son, her back to the door, her body trembling not with fear, but with purpose. Lord Voldemort, the most feared dark wizard of all time, had come to kill a child, and she, a young mother barely into her 20s, chose to stand between them. She had no chance, she had no weapon. But what she had was love, raw, ancient, and unknowingly powerful, beyond any curse or hex. This was not the act of a warrior on the battlefield. Lily was not an aura, not a duelist known for feats of strength. She had been a brilliant student at Hogwarts, known for her kindness and her defiance of cruelty, especially that inflicted by those like Severus Snape, whose journey would later intertwine fatefully with hers. But in this moment, she became a symbol of something far greater than spellwork. The sacrifice Lily made, refusing to step aside when Voldemort gave her the chance to live, became the most powerful act of magic in the entire series. "Stand aside, you silly girl, stand aside now," Voldemort had said, but she did not. She could not, and in that defiance she shattered the illusion that power lies only in domination. Her heroism did not come dressed in grand speeches or flashes of light. It was quiet, resolute, and final. By offering her life freely, Lily invoked a magic so old that even Voldemort, in all his arrogance, failed to comprehend it. This magic, love, freely given and sealed in death, created a protective charm that saved Harry's life. The killing curse, which had never failed before, rebounded. Voldemort's body was destroyed, his soul ripped from flesh. And the boy who lived, lived because a mother had chosen death. In The Philosopher's Stone, Dumbledore explains this magic to Harry. "Your mother died to save you. If there is one thing Voldemort cannot understand, it is love." This was not merely a comforting explanation for a child. It was a revelation. Voldemort's entire ideology, his pursuit of immortality, his hatred of weakness, his denial of love, was undone by a woman who had no intention of defeating him, only of protecting her child. Her love burned itself into Harry's very skin, making him untouchable, protected by a force greater than the darkest magic. Lily's sacrifice was not only the cornerstone of Harry's survival, but the domino that set the entire saga in motion. Without her, there would be no chosen one. Without her, the prophecy would never have unfolded as it did. She altered the course of destiny not by lifting a wand, but by refusing to abandon her son. That refusal did more than defeat Voldemort temporarily. It left a mark so deep in the magical fabric that it would guide and protect Harry through every danger to come. It is easy to overlook Lily in a story so filled with grand battles, dark artifacts, and legendary figures. She appears in fleeting memories, in echoes from the past, in the misty forms conjured by the mirror of Erised or the Resurrection Stone. But every time her name is spoken, it carries weight. The weight of someone who, though absent in form, is present in every step her son takes. Her strength became his strength. Her courage became the map by which he navigated a world full of temptation and fear. Even Snape, the man who betrayed her by joining the Death Eaters and ultimately sought redemption, built his entire posthumous life around her memory. "You have your mother's eyes," he tells Harry again and again. It is not just a line, it is a confession. Snape's love for Lily, though flawed and poisoned by his choices, became the secret path by which he turned against Voldemort. But it was not his love that saved Harry, it was Lily's. In the Deathly Hallows, when Harry walks into the Forbidden Forest to face death, he does not draw strength from spells or allies. He summons his parents with the Resurrection Stone. James is there, of course, noble and encouraging, but it is Lily who speaks last, who reassures him with the words, "You've been so brave." Her voice, calm and unwavering, is the same voice that once pleaded with Voldemort to spare her child. Her presence gives Harry the courage to accept death, just as she once had. Her heroism does not end in Godric's Hollow. It lives on each time Harry chooses what is right over what is easy. Lily's actions stand in stark contrast to Voldemort's cold logic. He could not understand why she would die when she had a chance to live. He could not grasp that love, selfless, unconditional love, was a magic he could neither learn nor destroy. In seeking to eliminate the threat of a prophecy, he created its fulfillment. He made Harry into what he feared most, someone who was protected by something beyond his comprehension. Her sacrifice reshaped how readers understood power. For all the spells, relics, and dark enchantments in the wizarding world, it was a simple act of maternal love that brought the most feared sorcerer to ruin. Lily proved that heroism does not always wear a cloak or ride into battle. Sometimes it kneels by a crib and whispers goodbye, knowing that death is the only choice left to make that means anything at all. When one reads of Lily's final moments, they are not filled with fire or fury. They are marked by stillness, the calm before the curse, the silence of a life ending for another to begin, and in that silence, something ancient stirred. It was this moment that gave rise to the idea that Harry was not alone, not truly, not ever, because his mother's love ran deeper than blood, stronger than bone, and it lived on in him like a shield. Even as Harry grew older, discovering the burdens of his fame and the responsibilities of his destiny, he carried her gift. When he resisted the temptation of the Elder Wand, when he chose to save Draco instead of letting him fall, when he forgave Snape after learning the truth, these were echoes of Lily. She had planted within him the capacity for mercy. In a world driven by revenge, she had shown him another path. And what makes her heroism so unique is its lack of spectacle. It was not celebrated. There were no medals, no songs, no portraits hanging in Hogwarts' great halls. Yet every time Harry triumphed over evil, it was Lily's influence pulsing behind the scenes. She was the unseen force, the quiet foundation of his willpower. Her death was not the end of her story. It was the beginning of Harry's, and by extension, the beginning of Voldemort's ultimate defeat. Even the very form of Voldemort's final destruction bears Lily's mark. When Harry returns from the forest, having willingly accepted death, he becomes master over it, not by force, not by curse, but by self-offering, just as his mother had done. In mirroring her act of self-sacrifice, he closes the circle, and this time Voldemort's spell does not rebound because of blood magic. It fails because the boy who lived now understood the power of the one who died for him. Dumbledore once told Harry, "To have been loved so deeply, even though the person who loved us is gone, will give us some protection forever." This was not a metaphor, it was a truth written in the story's very bones. Lily's love became more than emotion. It became a spell, older than language. It was written not in incantation, but in intention. She gave everything, knowing it would not be remembered in glory, but hoping it would be enough. And it was. In the end, it was Lily Potter, not a wand, not a prophecy, not a war, who undid the Dark Lord. She was a hero not in life, but in death. And her heroism continues to live wherever love stands unarmed against power and wins. Number 27, Fred Weasley. Fred Weasley was never just the class clown. Beneath every joke, every firework, every sly grin, there was a boy, and later a man, who understood the weight of war, the cost of defiance, and the true meaning of bravery. Alongside his twin brother George, Fred used laughter not to escape the darkness of their world, but to shine a light through it. He was not simply a prankster, he was a warrior in disguise, one who wielded humor as both shield and sword. And when the time came to fight not with fireworks but with wands and courage, Fred stood tall, unwavering, and unafraid. Fred's heroism did not begin on the battlefield. It began in the hallways of Hogwarts, where he and George staged what became a legendary act of rebellion. During Dolores Umbridge's tyrannical rule, when fear clutched the school and silence was enforced through cruel punishments, Fred and George lit a spark of resistance. They transformed Umbridge's oppressive regime into the butt of a cosmic joke, releasing a dragon of fireworks that tore through the sky of the Great Hall and summoning a swamp that couldn't be removed. This was no mere prank, it was a protest. Fred and George turned to each other and said together, "Time to go," the book recounts. In that moment they chose to abandon their school, not out of recklessness, but out of conviction. Their laughter mocked tyranny and gave others a reason to hope. Few acts during the rise of Voldemort carried such symbolic weight. Fred's act of defiance wasn't just about magic, it was about morale. In a world where students were told to obey and not question, he and George reminded everyone that humor could be subversive. Their departure from Hogwarts was not an escape but a challenge. They left through fire and flame, daring the world to follow their example. For many, that moment became a turning point. If two teenage boys could resist, then so could others. Fred's courage continued to manifest in quieter, more dangerous ways. When the Order of the Phoenix organized the mission to safely extract Harry Potter from Privet Drive before his 17th birthday, Fred was among those who volunteered. The plan was risky. The skies would be teeming with Death Eaters. The mission could go terribly wrong. But Fred didn't hesitate. Disguised as Harry through Polyjuice Potion, he became one of the decoys, drawing enemy fire onto himself. The night ended in blood and tragedy, with Mad-Eye Moody falling in battle and George gravely injured. Fred was not spared the horror of that mission. He saw firsthand the price of resistance, but still he did not falter. Even with his brother wounded, even with war closing in, Fred never let the weight of the world crush his spirit. The joke shop he had opened with George, Weasley's Wizard Wheezes, became more than just a place of laughter. It became a symbol of endurance. In a world shrouded in fear, their shop's bright windows reminded everyone that joy could still exist. Their products, from shield hats to decoy detonators, were not merely gags. They were tools of survival, resistance woven with wit. Fred became a supplier not just of jokes, but of hope. When the final battle came to Hogwarts, Fred did not hesitate. The castle walls, once filled with laughter and mischief, now echoed with spells and screams. Fred stood alongside his family, not as a boy who once set off fireworks, but as a man who understood what was at stake. He helped organize defenses, stood guard with Percy, the brother who had once abandoned the family, now returned, and fought with everything he had. In that final stand he was more than a twin, more than a jokester. He was a soldier of light, determined to protect what mattered. His death came suddenly, as so many do in war. A blast of magic struck while Fred was fighting alongside Percy, laughing at something his brother had said. It was a moment of reconciliation, of unity, of courage, all shattered in an instant. And that's the last thing he ever said, the book notes. The ground shook. Dust clouded the air. And Fred fell just as he had lived, with laughter on his lips and love in his heart. There was no time for farewells, no grand monologue, just the silence that follows when light is extinguished too soon. The grief that followed his death rippled through everyone who had known him. For Molly and Arthur Weasley it was the unimaginable, the loss of a child, a light in their home. For George it was as though half his soul had been ripped away. The twins had never been apart, never imagined life without the other. And yet Fred was gone. Gone in the very place they had turned into a sanctuary of mischief and memory. Gone before he could see the end of the war he had fought so bravely in.